Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at the 2026 US governor's map, and I'm looking at the states that are the 5 most likely to flip from blue to red, from Democratic held to Republican held. I just did a video yesterday on the top 5 most Republican seats to flip blue to the Democrats. This video I'm doing the flip. I'm going from blue to red. So if you want to hear me talk more about the governor's races in, say, Georgia or Nevada or Iowa or Ohio or Alaska, you can go look at that other video after this one as I go over all of those. Okay, so for today's video, the number one, I think, most likely state that's currently held by the Democrats for the governor's mansion to flip to the Republicans would be the state of Kansas. Now, Kansas and its governor's race is an interesting one. It is currently held by the Democratic governor, Laura Kelly. Now, Kansas is a state that usually at the presidential level is a safe Republican state. It did fall slightly behind 15% in 2020, but it was still a pretty reliably red state. Yet in 2022 and in 2018, the Democrat, Laura Kelly, won re-election in 2022 against the Republican Schmidt by 2.2%. And in 2018 was able to win for the first time by 5 points against the Republican Chris Kobach, who only got 42.98% of the vote, and independent Greg Orman, who got 6.5% of the vote. So Kelly won 2 very close elections in 2018 and in 2022. Now that she's not at the top of the ticket, Republicans feel this is the best opportunity they have to win this state back to the Republican side. Now, there are 3 candidates currently running in the race. The 2 most notable are Ethan Corson, a state senator from the 21st district, and Cindy Hochler, a state senator from the state senator as well, both from 2021 president, not the district part. Though it is worth interesting that Sharice Davids, the U.S. representative of the 3rd district, has expressed interest in running if a new congressional map is drawn by the state legislature, though so far it sounds like there's not going to be a redrawn map for the state of Kansas. Now, Ethan Corson, the first state senator I mentioned, already has 2 very important endorsements in the state. He has the endorsement of the current governor, Laura Kelly, and the lieutenant governor, David Toland. So, Ethan Corson, if he wins the Democratic primary, has the endorsement of the governor who's won 2 elections in a row now. On the Republican side, even though the only poll from Public Policy Polling from back in January, sponsored by Holscher's campaign, shows Holscher leading 33-9. On the Republican side, it is a completely wide open primary with several candidates running, including Jeff Collier, the former governor from 2018 to 2019, Ty Masterson, the president of the Kansas Senate, Charlotte O'Hara, Vicki Schmidt, the Kansas Insurance Commissioner, Scott Schwab, the Kansas Secretary of State. A lot of candidates are running on the Republican side, and last time I checked, the primary is completely wide open with no polling done as of yet. There's also no polling done yet for the general election, though 3 out of the 4 prediction websites, Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, Sablo Crystal Ball, and Race to the White House, have this race listed as lean Republican or tilt Republican, a flip for the Republicans. So not only could it be a potential flip, but 3 out of the 4 prediction websites already have it, so as a flip. At the Race to the White House, or on the Race to the White House map, in their simulations, they have the Republican Jeff Collier projected to be the Republican winner, and they have the Democrat Cindy Hochler as the Democratic winner. And in their simulations, Jeff Collier wins 71.3% of the time. Cindy Hochler wins 28.7% of the time. For the average projection for the election result, they have Jeff Collier projected to win by around 7.6%. And given the history of Kansas as a red state, with Laura Kelly term limited, not running again, it'll still be pretty competitive if the endorsed candidate ends up making it. But I think Kansas becomes the first state that's most likely to flip for the Republicans from blue to red, as a state that should give the Republicans a flip on election night. If they're not winning Kansas, the Republicans don't win Kansas on election night, the Democrats are most likely having a much better night than anticipated, and it could be a very dire situation for the Republicans if that one's not flipping. The next state that I think is the most likely flip for the Republicans is actually the state of Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's a state that, if you follow elections or politics, Wisconsin is one of the most pivotal toss-up states in all of the United States, and it's also one of the close. At the presidential level, 2016, 2020, and 2024, the average margin of victory was all under 1% in each of those elections. It went for Trump in 16, Biden in 20, and it went for Trump in 2024. At the governor level in 2022, the Democrat Tony Evers won by 3.4% against the Republican Tim Michel, so still a pretty competitive election. And in 2018, Evers won by defeating the Republican governor at the time, Scott Walker, by 1.1%. So Wisconsin is a very, very close state, and for 2026 is looking like it's going to be close once again. The Democratic primary is it's kind of the opposite of Kansas. Now, the Democratic primary is completely up for grabs here, with Mandela Barnes, the former lieutenant governor and Senate nominee in 2022, running. David Crowley, the Milwaukee County executive, is running. Francesca Hong, a state representative who has been surging in the recent Democratic primary polls, is running in this race, as well as Sarah Rodriguez, the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin. Right now, I'll show you the polling where it currently stands. Francesca Hong, the most recent poll from Marquette University from March 11th through 18th, is currently the leader at 14%. Mandela Barnes in second at 11%, still over 65% of the vote undecided. So as for who ends up being the Democratic nominee, it's really anyone's guess with how undecided, or the amount of undecideds currently left in this race. But 3 polls in a row now, Francesca Hong has held a narrow lead over the rest of the Democratic candidates. So we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. On the Republican side of things, Tom Tiffany, the U.S. representative of the 7th District, is the most notable Republican in this race. 2 Republicans, Bill Berry and Josh Oman, dropped out of the race when Tiffany announced that he was running, and it looks like Tiffany is going to be the Republican nominee. As for the general election, it's a complete toss-up from all 4 political prediction websites. Cook Politico, Inside Elections, Salvo Crystal Ball, Race to the White House, all have it as a toss-up. Now, it is interesting on the matchups here. Mandela Barnes versus Tom Tiffany in the 2 polls, both one Democratic poll sponsored by Barnes and one TIPP Insights poll, a Republican poll, both of which have Mandela Barnes leading against Tom Tiffany. David Crowley also narrowly leading. Francesca Hong versus Tom Tiffany, however, Tom Tiffany is leading in both of those polls, or in 2 Republican polls thus far. So even though it's very close, and we'll look at the results here as well in Race to the White House, which they have Mandela Barnes being the Democrat, Tom Tiffany the Republican, and it's almost 50-50. Mandela Barnes wins 54.2% of the time. Tom Tiffany wins 45.8% of the time, with an average projection of Mandela Barnes at 0.9. So the projection win is under 1 point once again in Wisconsin, and is very close. I think the Republicans, the best scenario for them to win this race seems to be, based on the early polling, for Francesca Hong to be the Democratic candidate and for Tom Tiffany to essentially get lucky with that matchup, and that would give the Republicans the best pickup opportunity in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin is going to be interesting because, again, a lot of the talk for 2026 has been it being a strong Democratic midterm year, so a Republican flip in the Wisconsin governor's race is going to be very close and very tough to see how it goes at this current point in time with everything so tight. But Wisconsin is certainly a state I'm keeping an eye on, especially if it's Francesca Hong versus Tom Tiffany. That could be the Republicans' second flip. The next state that I think is the 3rd most likely state to flip for the Republicans, you don't have to go too far. You're going to go to neighboring Michigan. And this governor's race is going to be an open race now that Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor, is term limited. And I think the main reason this race is the number 3 one for the Republicans is the special circumstances of this race. The Democratic mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, is decided to announce a governor bid as an independent in this race. Now, obviously, if you know the city of Detroit, you know it's a very heavily Democratic area, and Mike Duggan's main support being there likely would suggest he's going to pull a good amount of support from both candidates, but he's going to pull a lot of Democratic support away. And that opens the door to the possibility of a Republican win in a midterm election where the Democrats typically would win this governor's race without too much of an issue. In 2022, Gretchen Whitmer won re-election against Tudor Dixon by 10.5%. She was elected for the first time in 2018 against the Republican, I believe, lieutenant governor at the time, Schwett, winning by 9.6%. So Michigan's governor's race has not fallen under 5 points in 2018 or in 2022. The last time it did was 2014 when the Republican Governor Snyder won by 4.1%. So Michigan's looking like it's going to be very close this time due to the fact that it's a special race. On the Democratic side, there are 4 Democrats running. Jocelyn Benson, the Michigan Secretary of State, seems to be the odds-on favorite to be the nominee so far, or right now, for the Democratic Party. On the Republican side, the 2 most notable Republicans running are John James, the U.S. Representative of the 10th District, and Perry Johnson, the 2024 Republican presidential candidate. Now, John James still has the lead over the rest of the Republican field, but Perry Johnson's within 5.8% of John James right now, with still 46.7% of the vote undecided from the race to the White House average. So I think John James is the Republican nominee, but there's a possibility Perry Johnson could close that gap with the amount of undecided votes left out there. As for the general election, it's listed as a toss-up from Cook inside Sabato and race to the White House, so definitely a very close race, completely up for grabs in this one. As for the polling averages right now, race to the White House and Real Clear Politics actually have John James leading at 0.7% ahead of Jocelyn Benson, 33.9 to 33.2, with Mike Duggan getting a whopping 23.4% of the vote. Now, there's still roughly about 9.5% that are undecided in the race to the White House poll. In the Real Clear Politics one, 11% undecided. James' lead in that one is 3.5. So the polling thus far actually gives John James a very narrow lead over Jocelyn Benson, and Mike Duggan is playing a very large reason why that is the case right now. For the race to the White House, for the state itself, in their simulations, Benson wins 59.2% of the time. John James wins 40.8% of the time. Jocelyn Benson's projection is around a 3-point Democratic win. So what happens when you look at those, say, 9 to 10% or so that are still undecided is probably going to be what ends up shaking this race one way or the other. But John James having a narrow lead at this point gives the possibility that Republicans could flip the state of Michigan to their side, and Mike Duggan pulling a lot of votes away from Jocelyn Benson would be the main reason why. But given that dynamic, Michigan, I would have my would have it as my third possible flip for the Republicans going from blue to red. The next state I would look like for the fourth potential flip would be the state of Arizona. Now, Arizona, this is Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs. She is up for re-election, and she just barely won this governor's race in 2022 against the Republican Kari Lake. And when I mean barely won, I really mean that. 0.67% separating Hobbs and Lake in this very close race. The overall margins of votes, roughly around 17,000 or so votes separating Hobbs and Lake in this very close race. Excuse me, need that back. Yeah, so roughly about 17,000 votes separating those two in that race. So for 2026, where do things stand? Well, Katie Hobbs is going to be the Democratic nominee again for governor. She's the governor. She's running for re-election. On the Republican side, there was a Republican primary underway that looked to be very competitive between U.S. Representative Andy Biggs and Karen Taylor Robson, both of which had the endorsement of Donald Trump. With Karen Taylor Robson dropping out of the race, Andy Biggs is going to be the Republican nominee. U.S. Representative David Schweikert is also running. He doesn't have much of a chance, though, in the early primary polling data. Andy Biggs will be the Republican candidate in all likelihood when everything is said and done. And what this means for the general election is it actually gives Katie Hobbs a bit of a boost in this race. Cook Politico and Inside Elections have it as a toss-up, Sabato lean Democrat, and race to the White House as tilt Democrat. The current polling data right now, it's not looking too great for Andy Biggs. The most recent poll from Noble Predictive Insights, Hobbs leading Biggs by about 5%. And the averages, race to the White House is Hobbs up 6.7%. Real Clear Politics has Hobbs up by 3%, an average of 4.85. The main thing Republicans have going for them in this race is that Arizona swung to Donald Trump in 2024, winning by 5.5%. And there's a good amount of undecided votes still left out there, roughly 17.45% in the average of the two polling averages, with Hobbs only at 43.7 and Biggs only at 38.85. So the best thing Republicans have going for them right now is there are plenty of voters who either are undecided, don't like either candidate, or are not willing to say right now who they are supporting, and that gives the Republicans an opportunity to win. Objectively, it doesn't look too great for them right now that Biggs is only at the high 30s and Hobbs is already in the low to mid 40s. Democrats have the lead right now, but there is enough undecided vote. It gives the Republicans a chance at potentially flipping the seat if they can buck the trends of the midterm and potentially pull off the upset in this race. So Arizona, I would put as my fourth most likely state to go red, and I think Katie Hobbs is going to win. That's why it's my fourth most likely state, but Arizona, of the potential top 5 Democratic to Republican flips, I think Arizona is there because the math is possible with the amount of undecided votes that are left out there. It's certainly an uphill battle at this current point in time, but the math is there for Andy Biggs to potentially pull off the win. It's also a possibility heading into election day, maybe voters, independents decide they don't want Katie Hobbs as governor anymore, which opens the door more for Biggs as well. But again, that's sort of like wishing for the Republicans at that point. But even still, those are the top 4 flips of the Republicans right now. Number 5, I thought of a few options, but once Amy Klobuchar entered the governor's race in Minnesota, I think that one's pretty much out of grabs for the Republicans. Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro is not going to be competitive. New York with Kathy Hochul doesn't look like it's going to be competitive anymore either. So I was down between 2 states, New Mexico or Maine. At the top of the ticket in the Senate race for New Mexico, there's not going to be a very competitive race. So for Maine versus New Mexico, I looked at the race of the White House polling average, both of which are listed at lean Democrat. They're projecting the Democrat to win New Mexico by 10.4, the Democrat in Maine by about 8.3, both of which I ultimately think are going to go for the Democrats. But I think of the two, the most likely one that could flip would be the state of Maine. In Maine, both of which are open races, but Maine Governor Janet Mills is term limited, and there are competitive primaries going on both sides. Shanna Bellows, Troy Jackson, Angus King III, Hannah Pingree, and Nirav Shah are all fighting out in the Democratic primary, and it's really anyone's guess right now. They're all very competitive in this race. In the most recent poll from Impact Research, which I do believe is sponsored by the Jackson campaign, Troy Jackson, Nirav Shah is leading with still 6% undecided by a lot over the rest of the field, but they all have a considerable amount of the vote, 31%, 17, 18, 16, 9, all polling very strongly. Pan Atlantic Research, in that poll, Nirav Shah and Angus King are tied 24-24. Hannah Pingree is 18, Shanna Bellows 16, Troy Jackson 10. So a lot of the Democrats are polling very strongly. Nirav Shah seems to be the leader in most of them, but this is a very competitive Democratic primary underway. The Republican primary, there are a lot of candidates running as well. A few have dropped out recently or declined to run, including Laurel Libby, who was seen as a potential candidate for a while. But the most leading candidates right now are Jonathan Bush, who is the nephew of former President George H.W. Bush, Robert Charles, a lawyer and Assistant Secretary of State. Garrett Mason is running as well. As for the polling data thus far in the Republican primary, it seems that Robert Charles is the leader at this current point in time, 26% for Charles in the most recent poll. Garrett Mason is at 11%. Bush is only at 4% in this, so he's behind David Jones and James Libby, though James Libby did drop out of this race. 34% still undecided, so up for grabs to see how this ultimately goes, but it seems Robert Charles is the leader to be the Republican nominee right now. As for the general election, it's certainly an uphill battle for the Republicans. Likely Democrat from Cook Politico and Inside Elections. Sadler Crystal Ball, lean Democratic, race to the White House. Tilt for the Democrats. Maine at the governor level. We can look here at the governor level for 2022, and it voted for Janet Mills by roughly about 13.2% over Paul LePage in 2022, and in 2018, it voted for Janet Mills by 7.7% over the Republican Moody. Now, as for the prior election before that in 2014, the Republican Paul LePage was able to win re-election by 4.8%, with a lot of vote splitting going on there from the independent candidate Cutler. I think the only way the Republicans could win this race would be with a third-party candidate running. That's splitting the vote. It's certainly wishful thinking. I'm not betting on it to happen, but the Republicans could win the state of Maine if there'd be enough vote splitting going on there with the Democrat candidate and independent candidate. So Maine, I certainly would not put much stock into flipping to the Republicans from the Democratic side, but if I'm looking at this map, what I think is the state that's most likely to flip to be the Republicans' fifth flip between Maine or New Mexico, I would narrowly give the edge to Maine, but I'm not really banking on either one being Republican flips. That being said, I do think there's a realistic possibility that Kansas, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona could be in the neighborhood of potentially flipping. So with that said, those are the 5 states I think that are most likely to flip from blue to red on the 2026 governor map. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe. If you did, leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What states you think are going to flip, maybe other ideas or videos you have for me as well. Anything you want, put it all down there. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.